This past weekend was the 4th of July in the United States. And it got me actually thinking about America's 250 years old now. And so much has changed since July 4th, 1776, when it comes to work and to labor. And in America, work and labor and how money has been distributed has always been a form of conflict and been at the center of America. If you understand the labor movement within the United States, it may help ease the anxiety around where we're headed. I'm talking about artificial intelligence and automation and what that's actually going to look like on a day-to-day basis. And I want people at the end of this video, if you watch this, to understand it's about the institutions in a country, not necessarily the technology. As a labor economist, someone who studies technology and how it impacts the labor market, I want to talk about the 5 major economic eras that the United States has been in and how it was the institutions that set up who were the winners and who did not win. Let's get right into it. Imagine that it is 1780, 4 years after July. If your family owned some land, owned a farm, more than likely you worked on your local land, and the economy was very localized. Politically, America was still in experimentation. The Constitution was ratified, government was relatively small, but America began to establish itself as an economic powerhouse because of cotton. Cotton was king during this time period, and it actually was America's largest export throughout the entire world. The institutions during that time period set up who actually benefited from cotton. The people who were actually working the land were indentured servants and slaves. Chattel slavery was an economic system that helped generate a lot of wealth for the landowners and people who use cotton to make money. For example, most of these slaves were in the South. They were responsible for the cotton and other goods that then was shipped up north to create different goods and dealing with the shipping and the logistics to the rest of the world, the banking, the financing. A lot of it was built off of the work of the slave. Although some people may have never owned slaves and owned the textile mill up north or owned the insurance company, during that time period, slaves were seen as property. A lot of the big time insurance companies that we see today, a lot of them actually insured that property, which were the enslaved people. Chattel slavery was not just just a discrimination thing. It was an economic system that helped America establish itself as an economic powerhouse throughout the globe. And this is a lesson that we can learn from today. The institutions are very important in who actually is benefiting from the economic growth. Economic growth and economic opportunity are 2 different things. And the institutions of a nation help establish who is actually going to benefit from the economic growth and who actually has access to real economic opportunity. The cotton gin was invented. The demand for a lot of manual labor when it came to cotton wasn't necessary anymore. You begin to see the development of what is known as industrialization. You have these machineries, you have these large factories that were established, which required a different type of work because some of the manual labor began to be automated because of the modern technology during that time period. Technology changes what type of labor is actually deemed valuable. In the United States, you had the development and the establishment of these large factories, and a lot of millionaires and billionaires were developed during this time period, but also the railroad. The railroad, from an economist standpoint, is arguably one of the best things that happened in the United States because it made production and productivity move much faster. We have these corporations that were beginning to be established where they had these large amount of workers. We moved from these small localized businesses to these factory towns like Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and a lot of wealth was established during this time period. And technology determined what type of labor was valuable. It was interesting during this time period, because the demand of labor was so important, because we were entering into a new technological era, workers began to have a greater say in demanding rights. Though conditions were harsh, workers began to realize if we work together, we can get more benefits. And so a lot of the labor laws that are in place to this day are from that industrialization era, because workers began to go on strike. Workers began to develop unions because the conditions were harsh, they were brutal. And people were, I'm not trying to lose my life to make a billionaire another $1 billion. What is in it for me? Technology doesn't necessarily mean that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, depending on how the institutions are set up and how people work together can determine distributed. The workers were in a position of power to develop these new form of institutions to lessen the load of the harsh conditions that they were working in for them to have more benefits. I want to talk about the next major economic era in the United States, World War II, and then the post war economy. So, from World War II to about the 1970s or so. And the main idea from this is that war and policy, again, a form of institution with the policy, shapes the economy. Because World War II was a very tumultuous time across the world, it provided an opportunity for leadership to induce more government spending. So, government during this time period became larger. Remember, right before World War II, America had just got out of the Great Depression. That was a horrible time with the bank runs, with people starving, people fighting for cans of food. All of that more than likely led to the government increasing their spending during World War II, not only to support America in the war, but to also keep America sustaining itself with economic growth and stability. This was also a time where women were able to enter the workforce because of the demand for work related to the war, and also, many men were away and were drafted and had to go fight. This gave women more economic opportunity outside of the home. During this time period, government spending created a huge demand for labor because even after World War II, you had the development of the GI Bill, the interstate highway system, which created a demand for work. People had access to college because of the GI Bill. People had access to buy their first home. We see this establishment of the middle class. Now, I can't talk about this time period without acknowledging that not every veteran or person who served during the military received the same type of access to opportunity. With that, excluded people of color, primarily Black people, from receiving these opportunities. Now, it is argued that the interstate highway system was something that was very important to keeping the sustainability and the economic growth of the United States because it caused communication and productivity to increase just because it was much quicker and simpler to get around. Things are going well. This is what a lot of people refer to a lot of times in media and in movies. These were the good old days. These were the times where America was at its best. But at the best for whom? The ones that had access to this economic opportunity. And it's the institutions that shape that. Then we go into the 1970s. Other nations are beginning to recover from World War II. They're starting to develop stronger institutions and they're beginning to become more competitive with new technology and innovation. This caused a lot of inflation, and we had an oil shock in the United States, which led to deindustrialization. Because these other nations were growing and they were advancing, and it was becoming expensive to produce a lot of manufacturing in the United States, began to offshore manufacturing to these other nations. And many of these factory workers lost their jobs. And even until this day, some of the cities that were thriving during the industrialization era of America still haven't recovered from the industrialization. Because think about it, a factory worker doesn't just become a service worker overnight. It requires skill, it requires training, it requires access to these opportunities. That's how you have the development of the Rust Belt, where you have these cities that were once thriving not being the same anymore. And the cities that struggled during the deindustrialization era were cities that were typically built around one major industry. If we look at Detroit, for example, Detroit was built off of car manufacturing. That's where a lot of the wealth was produced. When things became more automated because of technology, and the demand for southern manufacturing began to go overseas because the corporations wanted to save money, Detroit declined. Although America began to transition to a more service based economy because of automation and technology and all these advancements, and economic growth was thriving during this time, this is another labor lesson that aggregate growth, meaning as the whole nation, doesn't mean that there aren't different regions and areas in the same economy that are actually taking a loss. That is why it's so important to have diversification in a regional and a local industry, because if one industry goes down or changes because of automation and technology, that can really be a detriment to that entire economy. And we have seen that in many cities. And Detroit, I think, is one of the clearest examples of that. The internet changed a lot. People were able to communicate in a company with the internet to someone who may have worked in an office overseas in real time. We begin to see corporations get larger. And some of the large companies that we see today weren't established until the late 80s or the early 1990s. Things began to move very fast. And now we're entering into the age of AI and automation and robots and quantum computing. Now, white collar jobs aren't disappearing, but they are changing. What we're seeing now in real time is that many entry level positions that are white collar are no longer needed because of artificial intelligence, because it can draft, it can summarize, it can do a simple analysis, it can code, it can create a website, it can do very junior level tasks when it comes to software engineering. Although many entry level positions are being restructured or eliminated, from a white collar standpoint, we're seeing a premium on human judgment and decision making skills, you being able to think critically and work under pressure. Those type of skill sets and those careers associated with that are actually in demand. If you think of the healthcare space, we see nursing professionals are projected to be one of the fastest growing jobs in the world because of artificial intelligence and automation. We see user experience designers be one of the fastest growing jobs, people who can understand how to keep people on an app for as long as possible. We see AI software engineers, machine learning experts, people in the trades, people in sales, people who are teachers, educators, mental health experts. All of those careers have things in common. You need human judgment, you need decision making, you need thinking on the spot. And all of these positions are going to thrive during this era of AI and automation. Now, work that isn't going to thrive is work where you're pretty much just summarizing information. It's a very repeatable digital task. That is going to be replaced by a robot and automation and artificial intelligence. But what's interesting about this time period is that now the average Joe has access to a lot more information. Then this is an opportunity where I know a lot of people may feel anxious and there have been a lot of layoffs. But whether you are looking for a job right now or you're stable in your career, this is another time where we're going to see, just like in the 1990s, the rise of the entrepreneur, more independent contractors, and we're about to see a new class of millionaires and billionaires for those who are able to use their skill set to where AI is going to complement it and not replace it. Although we're still in its infancy in terms of artificial intelligence being the main form of the new technology, it's a lot of great opportunity if you know how to position yourself. And now more than ever, we have access to information, whether it's through official channels or you're watching videos like me on YouTube, to where you're able to reskill and upskill and adjust. Because as we've seen in America's past, in the past 250 years, there have always been different modes of what work is economic opportunity. My advice for anyone, whether you are in the trades, whether you are in white collar, whatever industry, start to develop skill sets around what I call skill stacking. Everyone should master one technical skill, one human skill, and one critical thinking skill. That is the future. If you are able to think critically, have good judgment, have good decision making, you know how to influence people, you know how to lead, because what's going to separate one AI company from the next? We all have access to AI at some point, and if you don't, we will very soon. So, what's going to separate what can do with AI versus you? If someone may want to go in business with you, it may just be simply because this person can influence somebody to buy something. That is what's going to separate people. So, let me know what you guys think about this video. I hope you guys found this helpful. And thanks so much for listening. I'll see you guys next time.